All right. It's the NBA draft class of 1996, the 25th anniversary. We've got Iverson, the number 1 overall pick, bringing up the court. He passes off to Kerry Kittles, who was a starter on the Nets roster that went to 2 consecutive NBA finals. There's Abdur Rahif. He was drafted number 3 overall. Stephon Marbury. I mean, I think more people remember Marbury for his his career in China. He was great coming out of Georgia Tech. I think he was a sophomore, and he partnered with Kevin Garnett. And it was pretty disappointing that he didn't really want to stick around in Minnesota. He didn't really want to be Kevin Garnett's sidekick, so he forced his way out of the Timberwolves organization. But if he had stayed, I thought they would have been great. And then, of course, Kobe Bryant, probably the best player from that draft. He was drafted 13th overall by the Charlotte Hornets. They were my favorite team at the time. Of course, they traded him immediately to the Lakers for Vlade Divac. And there's Ray Allen. Speaking of draft day trades, he was drafted by, I believe, the Timberwolves. And then he was traded immediately to Milwaukee. I have to look up that information. Yeah, Ray Allen was drafted after Marbury, and then they were traded for each other. Allison, I was a huge fan of Allen Iverson growing up. I remember watching him at Georgetown. And he, like I said, went number 1 overall as a freshman. Like, at the time, that was a pretty big deal. Like, I remember watching the broadcast, and the announcers noted that, like, a sizable number of underclassmen were at the top of the draft. That was pretty unusual for the time because, I mean, back then, most draft picks were upperclassmen, and, like, Kobe Bryant. People like Kobe Bryant, like one and dones, we're in this era of one and dones, but back then that was, I guess, fairly new. And one interesting thing about that draft, I mean, there's 4 surefire Hall of Famers, and they're all guards, but if you look at the actual draft, it's like the majority of the top 10 are forwards, front court players. So it's kind of ironic that, like, to have so many players at the top of the draft being forwards, the best players ultimately end up being the guards, not all the guards. And so there's Steve Nash. He was kind of a late bloomer. He was drafted 15th overall out of Santa Clara. I remember watching him in the March Madness tournament. There was some hype about him. But he was drafted to, I guess, replace Jason Kidd, who had left. I can't remember if Jason Kidd had left Phoenix at that point, but he went to Phoenix. He was kind of a late bloomer. He didn't really come into his own until he went to Dallas. And he formed a pretty good trio with Dirk Nowitzki and Michael Finley, who was drafted in the 1985 draft class. And there's Iverson with the corner shot. That's Jermaine O'Neal. Not a lot of people know him. He was actually the youngest player in the draft. Like Kobe Bryant, he came out of high school. And he was, like, younger than Kobe Bryant by, like, I don't know how many days. But he was drafted by the Portland Trailblazers, and he was another late bloomer. I remember just reading about, you know, the attitude or the, I don't know what you'd call it, the persona of the Trailblazers at the time. People called them the Jailblazers just because a lot of the players seemed to have run-ins with the law and issues with maturity. But Jermaine O'Neal developed into a really good center. He had his best years with the Indiana Pacers. They were a contender, although they kind of ran into Michael Jordan, Pippen, and the Bulls, like a lot of teams. Here's Steve Nash. Going up against Ray Allen, Jesus Shuttlesworth. I think a lot of basketball fans today remember Ray Allen for his time with the Celtics and the Heat, but before that, I mean, even I kind of forgot his time with the Bucks, and then after that, he went to the Sonics. I'm sure everybody who's a player of 2K has seen He Got Game, but I remember watching it when it came out. I was so hyped into it. Stephon Marbury, there's Marcus Camby. He had a solid career. I mean, he wasn't the best center out of that draft. I mean, I would say that Jermaine O'Neal arguably had a better career than him, even though he was plagued by injuries. But amazingly, probably the best player from that rookie class wasn't even drafted. Ben Wallace, who I guess was recently announced as a member of the Basketball Hall of Fame. He was also a major late bloomer, but Marcus Camby was a good player, a solid player. I mean, he was known more for his defense, but coming in college, he was a pretty good two-way player. He played at UMass, and he was coached by John Calipari, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, UMass. And interestingly, John Calipari was the coach of the Nets, and they drafted Kerry Kittles, whom I mentioned briefly. And kind of just reading about like the intrigue, like they wanted to draft Kobe Bryant, and his parents were kind of pushing toward it because New Jersey, like the Nets were based out of New Jersey at the time, and geographically as close to Philadelphia, and that's Kobe Bryant's hometown, and his parents were kind of like eager to have him playing nearby, but Kobe and his team were, outside of his family, were kind of pushing for the Lakers, and so kind of John Calipari had to settle for Kerry Kittles. I mean, Kittles again wasn't really a star, but like I said, he was a starter on two Nets teams that went to back-to-back NBA Finals. I mean, they didn't really win either. But if you can draft a player who's, like I said, is a starter and is a key component for two finals teams, I mean, that's a pretty good pick. Obviously, it pales in comparison to whom they could have had in Kobe Bryant, but just shout out to Kerry Kittles. And there's Jermaine O'Neal getting swatted by Marcus Camby. Yeah, he was drafted by Toronto. I think Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, Toronto actually won the lottery, but because they were an expansion team, because they had just completed their first season, they were ineligible to getting the top pick. And then the other expansion team at the time, the Vancouver Grizzlies, they had the number 3 pick. So it was Iverson number 1, Marcus Camby number 2 to the Raptors, and then Sharif Abdur-Rahim to the Grizzlies with number 3. He was also kind of an underrated player. I mean, he had a solid career. I don't think he ever made any All-Star games, partly because maybe he played in Vancouver, close to the hometown with Steve Nash, who just scored there, but also because maybe his game wasn't particularly flashy. I kind of remember reading a scouting report, I think in Sport Magazine at one time. Maybe it was Sports Illustrated, but just kind of the knock on him was that his game was just very predictable and didn't really have a lot of moves. But this version of Kobe Bryant, or Abdur-Rahim, is rated 86 overall, so he's a solid player. So kind of, I thought I chose the teams based on rating. I mean, I thought it was pretty balanced, but the Ballers are down by 9. Who's cold? Is that Kerry Kittles? Maybe he's the weak link. He's the only player who's not part of any all-time team. I had to select him from the early 2000 Nets. So I'm kind of rooting for them to come back. Here's Ray Allen. Probably one of the best outside shooters of all time. I think he's kind of been eclipsed by Steph Curry. But for his era, he was up there with Reggie Miller in the discussion as the best jump shooter of all time. And there's Ray Allen. Or not Ray Allen, Allen Iverson. He's from the same hometown as the director of the famous documentary Hoop Dreams. His name escapes me, but let me just look it up. He's from Hampton, Virginia, I believe. And that's also the hometown of Hoop Dreams. The hometown of, let me see here, Steve James. And Steve James also did a documentary about the controversy Iverson faced out of high school. Apparently, so basically, Iverson was at a bowling alley when a riot broke out, and there was like discussion about whether, you know, how much of a role, or if any, he played in instigating, or maybe he participated in the brawl. But the documentary kind of just touched on like the history of the town and just the controversy around about whether he deserved to be. Oh, Kobe Bryant with the Showtime hang. Okay, so the ballers are ice cold, but let's just see here. So Steve James, Hoop Dreams, what's the name? Okay, it's called No Crossover, The Trial of Allen Iverson. So it was an ESPN 30 for 30 project. It was really interesting. I mean, Allen Iverson, a great athlete, and kind of showed footage of him playing football. He won a state championship in football, and like a local reporter was like, you know, what's next? And he's like, oh well, now we gotta win one in basketball. I think he might have been a baseball player too. He seems like that kind of guy. All-star point guard, all-star quarterback, / return man, all-star second baseman probably. But I remember his rookie season. He didn't have the cornrows at the time, but there's that famous clip of him crossing over Michael Jordan. Stephon Marbury. His skin tone seems darker than what I remember. But I just remember reading about him growing up on Coney Island. He dreamed of being a Knicks fan, and I remember just reading about one anecdote. He was just so loved and respected in his hometown. He was playing at Madison Square Garden, and I guess there was some kind of riot. So the building officials, they got Marbury onto the PA and got him to calm everybody down just because he had that kind of pull. There's a mismatch. Iverson strips the ball. Passes it to Antoine Walker. He passes to Allen. Antoine Walker, he had an okay career. I mean, I think, unfortunately, when I think of Antoine Walker, I think of his gambling debts. I mean, he's another athlete who got rich young and then racked up a bunch of debts. I guess gambling, or maybe having a lot of hangers on, but just it's kind of a sad tale. But I think leagues are kind of like more mindful of trying to set up your players for success. I think that's definitely it's the responsibility of the players, but like the players union, like they should set up financial literacy programs for like incoming players. And Allen Iverson is one of those players, but I know he's got like a trust that Reebok set up for him when he when he signed a contract for them. Like a $40 million trust that kicks in when he's like 45 or something, or maybe it's kicked in already. So you cash in on the court, cash in off the court. But I remember, I guess his nickname was The Answer. I never really called him The Answer, but I just remember being a part of like his campaign with Reebok. Yeah, but I guess Antoine Walker was a star for the Celtics. And I remember him being on the cover of like Live 99, NBA Live. So like the mid to late 90s, I was so into basketball and basketball video games. I was a Live guy at the time. And then 99 was when NBA 2K came onto the scene. I mean, these days I'm not so much into basketball or basketball video games. Like I'll buy 2K occasionally, but I won't really play it that much. But Antoine Walker, his little shimmy, maybe you might want to see a clip of him doing his little shimmy, celebration shimmy. But I also remember reading about him just taking a bunch of threes when he probably shouldn't have. Like, there was a period, I think, like a 3-year period in which the three-point line was actually, like, closer than it is today. I could probably look it up, but I'm kind of lazy. But definitely, 95, 96, the three-point line was slightly closer. And that's why there was so many three-point attempts. And there's Iverson finishing at the rim. I don't think we see that today, like a 6-foot even point guard. I mean, there's Iverson of the 90s, Isaiah Thomas of the 80s, but I can't really think of a point guard today who's like under 6'2". Like, they want point guards who are taller, 6'3" and up, because you have to be able to get to the rim and finish at the rim. Well, you can be like Trae Young today, and you'd have that floater, or Tony Parker from years prior. Just get to the rim. And it's interesting how, like, in today's game, it's like the primary ball handler seems to have the ball a lot more compared to before. I think that's partly because of like the introduction of zone defenses. Like, I remember even like in the mid-90s, even in NBA Live games, there was like illegal defense. So you couldn't double team a player unless they had the ball. In video games like NBA Live, actually, you could turn off the option, but by default, if you doubled or triple teamed the player without the ball, then you got called for illegal defense. But with zone defenses, you can technically do that. There's a shooting foul. The Ringers are still up by 12. I don't know if that's better or worse to have zone defenses. I wonder how many... Like, I'm not too much into the analytics of basketball, but I wonder how often teams go with the zone defense versus the man. Or maybe they even, like, banned zone defense. I just didn't realize it. Or they removed zone defenses. Stephon Marbury. I remember there was kind of like him like eating petroleum jelly or Vaseline on a webcam. He was kind of mocked for it, but like, you don't know the context of that. Like, maybe he was like under severe distress or mental anguish, and that's not something to joke about. But I respect the fact that he created a shoe line An affordable shoe line, Starbury. That's impressive. Shaq has done that with Reebok. I think it's admirable. I don't think it's cool to like mock a player who's trying to introduce shoes that are affordable to young kids. That's pretty cool. And Steve Nash is a coach for the Nets. Again, I don't really follow basketball all that much. I know he's a coach. Or is it the Bucks? I don't even know. Call me a casual. Oh, there's Kittles. He's still cold, but he's maybe thawing off. But Steve Nash is, you might not think it, I mean, he's a good athlete. Like, just I remember reading like Sports Illustrated article and coming out of high school, how like local coaches said he was like a great baseball player, great hockey player, who's good enough to play for the Canadian soccer team, Canadian national soccer team. Which makes sense, I guess he grew up in South Africa. And he's actually like a soccer fan. He did analysis for one of the networks for their Champions League, and he noted how he did have the option to like do some kind of trial as a youth for Tottenham, and he's a Tottenham fan, which I can kind of forgive him for. At least he's not an Arsenal fan. But yeah, just remember that he did analysis for one of the networks for their UEFA or their Champions League coverage. So Ballers are within 2, so I set it to go up to 50. Iverson, fading shot, that was a 3, I think. Are buckets worth 1 or 2? I haven't even been paying attention. It's Kobe Bryant. Who's that setting the pick? Abdurrahim. Oh, Bryant's cold. It was out of bounds. The Ballers get possession. Antoine Walker. But, oh wait, I don't have Peja Stojakovic. I forgot him. I should have had it. Oh man. I don't really want to redo it. How did I have Peja Stojakovic? I should have put him instead of Kerry Kittles. But yeah, he was another player from that vaunted 1996 draft. I feel dumb. Of course, he was a late bloomer as well. He was drafted 14th overall, which I guess was still qualifies as being a lottery. I mean, Stojakovic had a better career, but honestly, I remembered Kittles more than Stojakovic just because Kittles was drafted top 10. He was drafted by the team whose building was hosting the draft, so that's the Nets. The draft was in the building of the Nets. That was a pretty big deal because they had a new coach at the time, John Calipari. Like I said, he didn't do so well. Went back to college, but then he found success at Kentucky. I'm just kind of looking down the draft list. I mean, there was John Wallace, Walter McCarty. I remember them both because they were in He Got Game along with Ray Allen. And I think I remember the so Walter McCarty, John Wallace, they played Jesus Shuttleworth's high school teammates. So there's the 3 of them, and then there was another player, I think his name was Travis Best, point guard who had the mustache. That's 4, and then the 5th player, Jesus' friend Scooter or whatever his name was, he was an actor who he He made a guest appearance on The Sopranos and also The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He played Lisa's friend Dana. I could probably look it up, but yeah. Who else? Derek Fisher was in that draft. He had a pretty solid career. Jerome Williams, I remember him. Travis Knight. He was a teammate of Kobe Bryant on the Lakers. Vitaly Potapenko. I remember that name. Zydrunas Ilgauskas. He made a couple of all-star teams. He played on teams with LeBron when LeBron came into the league. There were some busts among the lottery picks. I think Potapenko, Todd Fuller, Eric Dampier, Samaki Walker. I remember him. He had like a white hat, like a white suit and a white hat, if I'm not mistaken. But Renzen Wright, he tragically was killed in 2010. He was drafted 7th overall by the Clippers. I mean, I remember like the first 10 picks because like I watched it live and I like wrote down all their stats so I could recreate them in NBA Live 96 for the Super Nintendo. So it was Iverson, Camby, Raheem, Marbury, Allen. I'm kind of cheating because I'm looking at the list, but definitely remember that trade as it happened. The Marbury Allen trade. I thought they were the same player just because they were both guards, but they were pretty different. Renzen Wright, Kittles, Samaki Walker, Dampier, Fuller, Todd Fuller. Jermaine O'Neal was just outside of the lottery at 17. Zydrunas Ilgauskas was 20. Othello Harrington, that's a familiar name. So he was a senior coming out of Georgetown, so he would have played with Iverson. So that's probably how I remember him. Why I remembered him. Just looking down the list of other draft picks, the second round, I don't really see much. So the Ringers are within 2. They're the better team. If I had selected Stojakovic instead of Kittles, I think it would be closer. Marbury. He's exhausted. He strips the ball from Iverson. He lobs it to... Kobe Bryant missed. Iverson is carrying the ballers. He's going to pull up. Allen with the rebound. He passes back to Allen. Iverson. He hits it long. Nash is on the deck. But the 1996 NBA draft is, for my money, the best draft. Certainly the most memorable. I know 1984 had Olajuwon, Jordan, Stockton. I think there was someone else, another Hall of Famer. Let me just look that up real quick. Charles Barkley, apologies to Barkley. Otis Thorpe. I remember him. I think he won a couple of championships. The Rockets. Yeah, he did. Apologies to Sir Charles. I forgot you were drafted in 1984. And then, of course, there was the 2000 NBA draft. You had LeBron, Carmelo Anthony, Wayne Wade. Chris Bosh, and that's game. For the 96 NBA draft, you can't... That's my favorite draft. Okay, maybe not the best, maybe not the most memorable, but certainly my favorite draft. Here's the stats. For the Ballers, Iverson. Damn. He and Ray Allen carried the Ballers for real. 29 points between them. Ringers, Kobe Bryant, he led the way. Nash, Abdul Rahim chipping in. Camby. Yeah, so pretty cool. So the NBA draft was the 25th anniversary was actually yesterday, the 26th. But better late than never. So I would recommend maybe watching maybe some footage or just some like retrospective videos. Those are some good players.